You're dressing down today, Isaac.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost unbearable in my house heat wise. So I thought that a suit would be a bit too hot, even right now, without the fan on. Even with the
Yeah.
fan on, I'm barely surviving here.
And I think you're wearing the same thing you wore last time, William. So I have no comments about your apparel.
I think so. I was going to say it was 35 degrees here in Calgary yesterday, but of course we are in the middle of Stampede, and the best weather for Stampede is hot and sunny. That's what you want it to be for the whole 10 days. So I'm not complaining because this is a beautiful time to be in Stampede.
All right, let's get this thing on the road. Hello and welcome everyone to another exciting, or at least I hope exciting, edition of Off the Record. This is our Friday kickback show. We cycle through a rotating cast of the True North characters and we chit-chat about the stories we have covered through the week. Some of the ones we didn't get to. We try to find the lighter side in this turbulent, chaotic, and crazy world as much as we can. As I've joked with a couple of people, the worse things are for the country, the better they are for our shows. And Off the Record is no exception. I'm Andrew Lawton with you for the next however long this takes, joined by True North Chief Operations Officer, or is it Chief Operating Officer? I don't know. I just call you COO usually, William McBeath, and our Alberta correspondent, Isaac Lamoureux. Good to have you both with us. How's the Alberta summer treating you?
It's great here in Calgary. As I said, Stampede season, everybody's happy. It's hot, it's sunny, we have water again. Everything's coming up Calgary.
Yeah, it's okay here, I guess. Really hot. I'm dying in my house. And all my friends are at the Stampede. I guess they don't have to work 9 to 5 jobs, so they can just go whenever they'd like. But I'm obviously in my office working. So
Yes, and don't you forget it. You're also in Edmonton, so it's not like we're the reason. It's not like I'm keeping you from Stampede. Geography is keeping you from Stampede. Now, what we did do is force Isaac to turn off his fan before the show began because it was like coming through to the microphone. So if he's like just like melting into a puddle by the end of it, that will be why. So this is the benefit of live to tape. Anyway, I must say, despite how people may make an assumption based on my appearance, I'm not a huge fast food person. Certainly, I could not tell you the last time I was at a KFC, but KFC has been in the news this week. Isaac, what's going on?
yeah, I actually can't tell you the last time I've been to KFC either. But I definitely don't plan on going anytime soon, given the recent news, which is that Ontario KFC restaurants are going halal friendly or Muslim friendly with halal chicken and the removal of pork products from their menu. So all of the restaurants in Ontario, except those in Thunder Bay and in Ottawa, have switched to halal chicken and removed pork products like bacon from their menu, except for the joint KFC and Taco Bell locations.
Do you still get your bacon if the KFC is sharing a roof with a Taco Bell? Okay.
That's right. So if you really want your bacon, you're going to have to go to a shared location. And when we were discussing this on Monday, when we weren't even sure if it were true or not, I thought for sure that it would be the case that it was just one radical owner at one KFC location, but all across the province. I mean, this is very surprising for me, especially considering I like to think that Western culture sees bacon as one of their favorite foods. Whereas when I was looking at the data, the Muslim population in Ontario is about 5 to 6%. So you're really alienating a lot more people than you're catering to, I'd say. What do you guys think?
Yeah, and also I would say everyone's focusing on the Ontario bit, but if you can put that letter back up, this is a letter that KFC sent out to community leaders. So I believe it was sent out to like the heads of various Muslim organizations and mosques back in May. It says this will be followed by the rest of Canada by year end. So by the end of the year, they'll have taken this Ontario project and made it national. So this is causing a bit of a moral panic of sorts on Twitter. You've got some people that are saying, boycott KFC. I don't want to eat that halal chicken. I actually am of the mindset that I don't really care. I've had halal chicken. One of my favorite go-to things if I am out in the world is shawarma, and shawarma restaurants are almost all halal. I do think that whenever a company makes a decision like this, you always have to wonder why. Is it because they're looking at a decision that's being made for commercial reasons, or is it that they're doing something to try to pander? And apparently, I didn't realize this until I was looking into this story. Almost all the chicken chains in Canada are halal. Like Mary Brown's is halal, Popeyes is halal. So KFC in that way is a bit of a laggard. I'm more intrigued by the removal of bacon, because it's one thing to add something to the menu that doesn't really change anything for anyone else. Like you don't become a Muslim when you have halal chicken, but taking away something that consumers wanted, that to me is a bit more that to me I find a bit more interesting here. What do you think, William?
Yeah, I was thinking about the bacon thing, and I don't recall the last time I was at a KFC, and I'm not sure if anything they sell has bacon on it. But then I
Well,
thought,
they said they were removing pork from the menu, so it must have been on the menu in some form.
I guess so. I mean, logically, yes, that would make sense. I guess now I was thinking though that if you think about big fast food chains like McDonald's or Burger King or even Subway, and I mean Starbucks has breakfast sandwiches, all of these places have bacon. And it can't be that Muslim people don't go to any of those fast food restaurants, right? Like, I can't imagine that precludes people from going there and ordering, like, if you're at McDonald's, I don't know, the Filet-O-Fish, which probably has very little bacon on it altogether. So that led me to think this was more about virtue signaling than it was about specifically addressing the religious dietary requirements of a segment of the Canadian population. And virtue signaling, of course, is something that companies love to do without always thinking through, well, it cuts both ways. It signals good things, but then what other signal does it send maybe to the rest of Canada? So something to think.
Yeah, and when it comes to like kosher food and kosher restaurants, some Orthodox Jews do have very strict requirements on the facilities and even on the plates. Like they can't even eat off of a plate that at one point had non-kosher meat or meat and dairy mixed or something like that. I'm not aware of Islam being so strict. And again, that's just like Orthodox Jews. So I don't even think there is a facility rule where if bacon was served on something else, they can't have even the halal chicken on the menu. I don't know about that, but what was the reaction like to this that you saw, Isaac?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I was actually looking at the stock price. This is from Yum Food or Yum Brands, which is the
Yeah,
parent
that's
company of
the parent
KFC.
company of
And
KFC.
I was like, oh, maybe because obviously legacy media has picked up this story now. So I thought, okay, the story's getting around. We'll see if their stock price has dropped. And to my surprise, it hasn't really, although it did drop over the last month, but not in relation to this news from what I can tell, just based on the timeline there. But of course, people on X are always more critical than any other public sphere. So yeah, there was definitely some backlash on X, but it hasn't really reflected their stock price. So I don't know that that's obviously what they're going to care about most as a company in regard to public backlash. So if their stock hasn't taken a hit, I don't think they're going to see a fault in their action personally.
Yeah, and it's also like one of these things that seems very online. Like the average consumer would have no idea going into a KFC on one day that, oh, this chicken tastes halal versus the time before. Now I don't know. I don't know if the restaurants are now like in some areas putting up big signs that say, now halal. Like I don't know how much attention they're drawing to it. What I found interesting, and one of the reasons I found this to be suspect originally, because what happened was this letter that we put up on the screen earlier was circulating online. The letter is dated May. We're now July 11th. So anytime you see something that you're like, okay, why now? And I had wondered if it was photoshopped or if it was faked or something like that. So the fact that it's taken this long means that KFC, it seemed like in May when they made this change, was really just quietly announcing it to members of the Muslim community. They weren't trying to draw a lot of attention to it. And when we wrote the story, I don't even think KFC responded, did they?
No, from what I read in the story, it said that they didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that I found quite interesting. So I like it's at the end of the day, who cares? It's a company; they can do what they want. But I'm always just so skeptical of any corporate decisions now that they're not rooted in anything resembling what they're supposed to be. And the great example I give about that is that I live not too far from General Dynamics Land Systems, which in my city of London, Ontario, is known for exporting armored vehicles to Saudi Arabia. So it's amusing when you drive by and you see like the trans friendly pride flag up in front of the facility manufacturing Saudi tanks. And you're like, why don't you just put one of those on every one to Saudi Arabia? Why don't you just slap that on the vehicles there? Oh, because you don't actually believe this when it's about your business that you're pandering to.
Yeah, and I had to laugh that if I guess if KFC really wanted to drive home the point, every location would have a cutout of the Prophet Muhammad eating a chicken sandwich or something, which I doubt is what they're going to do. I don't think we're going to see that at KFC anytime soon. But yeah, every time you see a company try to virtue signal or put out something that seems to be more about style than substance, you have to wonder if is there an ulterior motive, or is this simply a business decision as usual and everybody should go about their lives? I mean, personally, I'm waiting for Chick-fil-A to open up here again in Calgary, and solves all my problems. So
yeah, we have a Chick-fil-A in London now, and the problem is it's like clean on the other end of town, so I've never actually been to it, although there was a time I would have killed for it. And I don't know if Chick-fil-A is halal. I don't think so.
Couldn't tell you. Don't know. Probably am not going to do the homework on it either, if I'm honest.
So one thing I will say, when you mentioned earlier, William, other restaurants that have bacon and pork, the thing that's interesting, I've actually been to the Middle East. I've been to, well, Egypt is not Middle East, but it's a Muslim country, and I've been to the United Arab Emirates. And you don't realize how important pork is until you go to a breakfast buffet in a Muslim country. And you realize that pork sausages are better than any other sausages, and pork bacon is better than any other bacon. Like, they all have the alternatives, but they really, really pale in comparison to the real thing.
Well, and let's be clear, it's not bacon if it's not made from pork. No matter what the soy lobby tells you, soy bacon is not bacon.
Or turkey bacon, beef bacon. I mean,
turkey bacon, which is better than soy bacon, is still not actual bacon. It's a poor imitation at best.
Yeah, if you gave me turkey bacon, let's say, and said it was sausage or something, I'd be less disappointed, because once you hear the word bacon, you think of what bacon is, the taste, the smell, everything that makes it so wonderful. And then you taste turkey bacon, for example, and it's like, oh, you're just going to be disappointed because it's not comparable in any way.
All right. Well, we can all agree on the importance of bacon. Anyway, let's move to the next topic, which I've very much forgotten. So excuse me while I desperately try to find where we are in our rundown here. Oh, I'm not even doing it. It's you. William, speaking of the Middle East, what has Canada been exporting there?
Yeah, well, if you watch international news, you usually see the Prime Minister embarrassing Canada on the international stage. He's, I believe, down in the United States right now at a NATO summit, pledging that Canada will finally meet its 2% GDP goal, although he's providing precious few details on how that'll achieve. But one area where apparently Canada is just thundering forward and leading the way is in intersectional feminism. According to our representative in Lebanon, she attended a conference and she was proud to say that good news, people of Lebanon, Canada's intersectional feminist approach to foreign policy is going great. Now,
let's roll the clip before we unpack this further.
Yeah.
As for Canada, it has been implementing a feminist foreign policy since 2016. Canada's feminist foreign policy seeks to be inclusive, intersectional, transformative, and grounded in human rights. It takes into account the diverse experiences of women, men, and non-binary people, facing multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and exclusion, like income, race, religion, sexual orientation, gender expression, language, ability, and age. This allows us to be more responsive to systemic inequalities, specific needs and circumstances, and to avoid unintentional harm. Our feminist foreign policy is also cross-cutting. It applies across all of our international efforts, including diplomacy, trade, security, development, and consular services.
That was Sylvie Michaud, who is a diplomat at the Embassy for Canada in Lebanon, speaking in Beirut at the Asfari Institute for Civil Society and Citizenship. Okay. I'm a little bit... Just our colleague Cosmin Georgia wrote about this, and he's noted that perhaps the intersectional feminist foreign policy has not necessarily been well received in Lebanon, which has a child marriage and basically takes a very anti-woman view on anything to do with family law. So it's not really working, is it, Isaac?
Yeah, no. What came to mind actually was I saw a clip earlier of Trudeau speaking at the NATO summit where they questioned him on the GDP spending, and he said Canada was punching above its weight class, which obviously isn't true in regard to defense spending. We have no plan to get to 2% of our GDP requirement as required by NATO allies. But where Canada might be punching above its weight class actually is foreign investments in anything to do with gender diversity, any DEI terms that come to mind, like intersectional feminism. So, I mean, I don't know. I kind of laughed even watching this. I was like, I don't really even understand what's happening here.
It's like the flags at the on the GDLS vehicles. You can send them there, but probably not. William, you worked for the Harper government previously, and that was a time when Canadian foreign policy looked vastly different than it does now. I mean, would you ever have imagined there that even under a Liberal government, this would be the way that we're portraying ourselves abroad?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't to say, by the way, that advancing equality and human rights for women isn't important. It's
No, it absolutely is
the important thing. The problem is the woke speech that so many of our diplomats now seem to employ at the behest of our current government does tend to make countries like, say, example, Lebanon, who is possibly going to go to war with Israel at some point in the near future. Possibly it seems out of step with the everyday concerns of people who are living in that country, that maybe focusing on intersectional feminism is a luxury compared to, say, fundamental human rights, the abolishment of religious courts, which tend to persecute minorities, women, and people of different sexual orientations, or the fact that large swaths of the country still don't have the infrastructure and quality of life that you would expect. So, when we show up in these places and preach about woke nonsense, it diminishes Canada's standing in the world. And certainly, say what you will about Prime Minister Harper, he was taken far more seriously and treated with far more respect than the current incumbent is right now.
I think there's something to the idea of leading by example rather than preaching. And, one of the things that the Stephen Harper government did was ensure there was a path for gay people who were being persecuted in their home countries. This was something they've done, and the Liberals have continued. And showing that you respect gay rights, that projects a positive image to the world. The problem when you go into countries that have vastly different worldviews and you start telling them how they're supposed to do things, it just doesn't work. And I mean, Saudi Arabia is an interesting example of it. I saw this week, there's a Nike ad that has been made that's in Saudi Arabia that is all about basically women's empowerment. It shows, younger females that aren't wearing hijabs, that are doing sports, that are swimming, running around, playing. And again, the idea that an ad like that in Saudi Arabia, which again, a country that I will not say is at all a bastion of liberalism for women's rights or any other minority rights, but that ad could be made there would have been unheard of. But you don't get there by finger wagging. And that's, I think, what the Canadian government is doing on a lot of these things.
Yeah, that's another thing that came to mind here was, I mean, why would Lebanon listen to what we have to say? Why would they care? We can tell them, oh, you have to do this, you have to do that. But as you alluded to, William, if Trudeau and Canada as a whole don't really have international respect, they're not going to listen to us. That's something people always brought up about former President Donald Trump was like he said things, sure, but he also commanded leaders' respect. So I don't know. And another thing that I wanted to mention was, call me a nationalist, I guess, but I just think of all the issues happening here in Canada, and maybe I don't agree with investing hundreds of millions and billions of dollars abroad when we have so many problems to fix in our own country.
Well, I know you're right about that. I mean, the entire foreign aid discussion is one that I think desperately needs a reset, because I've seen little to no evidence that the Canadian approach to foreign aid even works and is yielding dividends. I mean, the problem is that the countries that need the help the most are countries that typically have rampant corruption, and money ends up just in the pockets of dictators far more than it helps any people.
Yeah, no, it's a sad reality that so much of foreign aid, well-intentioned foreign aid, is simply going to make thugs and criminals wealthy in these countries that desperately need help. But it requires, I think, some really new thinking and using the new technology that we have available to us. You know, there are examples of where governments are bypassing NGOs and governments entirely and simply loading money onto the cell phones of individual people living in very desperate circumstances because it's the only way that they can get around the pickpocketing that happens for so many foreign aid budgets. But you're absolutely right. And of course, foreign aid comes at a cost. You know, money we spend on foreign aid is money we can't spend on Canadian healthcare, is money we can't spend on our armed forces, is money we can't spend on any other of the 1,000 priorities that exist. So, you know, when you see Canadian diplomats traveling the world and talking about things like intersectional feminism, it does make you wonder really how much bang for our bucks we're getting on this dog and pony show that we call foreign affairs.
What we really need when it comes to projecting an image of Canada to the world is the austere reverence of Elizabeth May. Roll it.
I've got another grandbaby coming at the end of October, and I feel very, very committed, as I think everybody my age should. Baby boomers have this planet, and we can't walk away and leave it for our kids to fix it. And I'm sorry I just used the F word out loud, but I think kids understand what I'm saying. I'm a 70-year-old, angry, cranky version of Greta Thunberg. And am I ready? You bet.
I feel like you could Photoshop in like a giant overflowing wine glass there in the shot, and it would be probably even more believable. Now, this is a woman who in the past, I would remind you all, has kind of become the civility tone checker in the House of Commons. This was her taking aim at Michelle Rempel-Garner back when she was just Michelle Rempel for using a different F word in the parliamentary precinct.
Why does this government treat Alberta like a fart in the room that nobody wants to talk about or acknowledge? That is where my constituents have been at with this government for over a year.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Interrupt my friend in her speech, but I heard her say a word that I know is distinctly unparliamentary, and I think she may want to withdraw it. The word was F-A-R-T.
Are you serious, Mr. Speaker? Like, is my colleague actually serious? I just gave an impassioned speech about supporting Alberta jobs, and that's what the leader of a political party stands up and has to say? No, I don't withdraw it.
Decorum is important and respect is important in this place. I remind those who are now heckling me that you are breaking the rules of this place when you do so.
Okay, just again, let's go back to the other Elizabeth May clip, Elizabeth May this week. I just want to get that sense of decorum.
Baby boomers have this planet, and we can't walk away and leave it for our kids to fix it.
I'm not one of these profanity pearl clutchers. I keep profanity out of my show, and we generally keep it out of True North. If you want to get Elizabeth May uncensored, you can do that on Twitter. So I don't really care, but it's a little rich for her to take aim at Michelle Rempel using a 4-letter F word for flatulence while dropping the mother of all F-bombs herself. Again, am I paying too much attention to Elizabeth May, Isaac? I'm totally prepared to accept that.
I don't think so. And look, a lot of the chatter online, let's say, has alleged, I guess, that she was drunk or whatever. And I don't want to speak to that because I don't know whether she was or not. But I am slightly, I will say, concerned about Elizabeth May. Like, is she okay? On numerous occasions now, we've seen very odd things. Most recently, from when she had a completely different interpretation of the NSOP report than Jagmeet Singh did, because of course he said there were treacherous MPs, and she said, "Oh no, there's no treacherous MPs." The media blew it out of proportion, which are two very, very, very different things to say about that report. Very different. Yeah. So I'm very concerned about Elizabeth May. Also, her co-leader or whatever, Jonathan Pedneau, just resigned, and he said it was family issues, but of course there could be something deeper to that story as well. I'm not really sure. I don't know. And Elizabeth May is kind of all over the place. She also just said that it was, quote, obvious that it was time for Justin Trudeau to step down, which I wouldn't say I disagree with, but I mean, she's really putting herself out there more than we may have been used to in the past.
She's basically made herself out to be the permanent leader of the Green Party. There was that brief break from her with Anna May Paul, who was probably one of the more credible, sensible people that party has. And now we're like right back into Elizabeth May being just the permanent party leader for the Greens.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I have a soft spot. I enjoy an Elizabeth May press conference because they're rarely dull. You never quite know what you're going to get when she opens her mouth and starts sharing her things. And
where was it she did, like, she played the Welcome Back Cotter theme song and Lisa Raitt had to pull her off stage? Was that the Parliamentary Press Gallery dinner?
I think
talking about Omar Cotter and called him
like
classy.
that.
It was a weird,
in classical times, we would refer to politicians who maybe had a glass or too much to drink as tired and emotional, looking tired and emotional. But just on the whole use of foul language, perhaps Elizabeth May was more upset about the word fart because, of course, that involves the release of greenhouse gas emissions, which we know she's quite passionate about. So maybe that's what drove her to the double standard.
As soon as you started that sentence, I'm like, is he going? Is he? Yep, he's going there. She's offended by methane, not profanity.
It's a big part of the greenhouse gas cocktail.
But I think methane contributes more to parliamentary decorum than anything that's come out of Elizabeth May's mouth.
Yeah, quite possibly, but I'd say, at least she isn't dull. At least we aren't getting just another boring talking point filled speech.
Oh, so I just looked it up. The Elizabeth May thing on Omar Cotter, it was 2015. It was during the Parliamentary Press Gallery dinner, and she used the F word there too. She said Omar Cotter had more class than the whole effing cabinet. So it really, and this was before she tone policed Michelle Rempel, now Michelle Rempel Garner. So my goodness, okay. Well, Elizabeth May, there we go. We'll move on to our next topic today. I keep going away from the screen that has the topics on it. Oh, this one is also yours, William. This is, speaking of emissions, one of our favorite things to talk about here, climate hypocrisy.
Yeah, and how to get yourself a government travel agent, because I can tell you I'm pretty jealous about where some of these people get to jet off with. In this case, and believe it or not, we have one, our climate change ambassador, who's been on the job for just about 2 years, spending $250,000 on travel expenses, which you got to admit, in 2 years, that's a pretty impressive level of spending. I think you really have to quite work at spending that much money in such a short period of time. But of course, what so infuriates ordinary Canadians like us, what it was just a few weeks ago where Mark Holland chastised anybody who was thinking of taking a summer road trip as being a climate killer that's going to let the planet burn. And then meanwhile, you've got the ambassador for climate change crisscrossing the country on flights and staying in these very expensive hotels and achieving no one knows exactly what. Certainly not a reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions. I would imagine hers are vastly higher than the average Canadian. So just another example of climate hypocrisy, a government that says, do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah, and I remember John Kerry was the one criticized in the U.S. because he's their climate envoy, and he was taking private jets, and he was asked about this at one point, and he very glibly said, well, he's too busy. He can't always fly commercial. And I had actually asked John Kerry about that when I saw him in Davos, where he is a bit of a mainstay. And it's the same sort of glibness you get from these people because they believe that they're more important than you. So they need to fly around the world because they have a really, really important job to do. The rest of us plebs, no, we don't get to.
Yeah, this is a nice transition, I suppose, considering we just went from seeing the hypocrisy of Elizabeth May now to the hypocrisy of these high-flying elites, let's call them. And we've seen this with many Canadian ministers like Guilbeault, Trudeau, criticizing normal Canadians for, simply trying to live their everyday life as they fly their private jets around the country on a daily basis, what it seems like. So I don't know what it would take for this hypocrisy to end, but it's interesting to me whenever these ministers, let's say, propose some sort of guideline for I don't know, carbon emissions, let's say, a carbon footprint, a personal carbon footprint, let's say, it's like, well, could you live within that? I highly doubt that the answer would be yes.
Yeah, and I kind of take the view, I mean, France, for example, within the last year, I think it was, banned domestic air travel. And, it seemed ridiculous on the surface. And then you think, okay, well, at least in France, you have a way to get around quite easily. They've got a rail system that's quite good. But a lot of the eco-radicals would not hesitate to push something like that in Canada as well. And, David Suzuki famously would fly all around the world with a huge carbon footprint, I think always in business class, telling Canadians that, no one should be able, politicians who don't act on climate change should be put in jail. It's okay. Well, why are you so different than them? Your carbon footprint is better, is higher than the average Canadian that you're trying to force to pay this insane carbon tax.
Yeah, I absolutely think it's the hypocrisy that turns so many Canadians off the whole preachiness of government. We talked about how preachy this government's been in foreign affairs and on other things. But that's one of the things the government likes to do most, is to preach. It likes to say, you, dear Canadian, are not living up to our vast and high standards. And the problem is you. It's not how any of us are living our lives. And now, correct me if I'm wrong. I did read the article, but I want to make sure I get this right. Did it say she took a flight from Ottawa to Toronto and it cost $10,000? Is that somewhere in there? Now, I apologize if I read that part wrong, but part of me wonders, what part of the world could you even fly to that's going to cost $10,000? Like, you can get from Toronto to Sydney, Australia, which I would argue is pretty well the furthest you could go from Canada, and I think that even wouldn't cost you.
No, I think it was the conference attendance cost that, I think. Yeah, the whole trip. Yeah, but I think she was putting on a little thing. Still quite insane. And by the way, why didn't she take the train from Ottawa to Toronto? That's one where you have a lower carbon alternative.
And, why doesn't she look for some cheaper options when staying in hotels or when taking flights? Oftentimes, if I, as True North employees can attest, when they submit proposals for travel, my first reaction is often to see if there's a cheaper way of being able to do the trip. Can we send you in a day before? Can we put you in a nearby town as opposed to right next to where the event is happening?
Or in Davos, in a different country.
That is Andrew's poor having to deal with my cost.
But I was being far more cost efficient than Mark Carney and our climate ambassador are when they go to Davos.
But it's almost like they purposely choose the most expensive option whenever they travel, and that really grates on Canadians who are having to be so careful with how they spend their money these days. I don't think a lot of people object to the fact that sometimes our politicians and government people are going to have to travel for their work. We're not going to ask Justin Trudeau to zoom in to the NATO meeting. We think maybe there's value in him being there. But do we absolutely have to choose the single most expensive way of getting politicians from point A to point B, having them stay in the nicest hotels? I think that's what really bugs Canadians when they see their hard-earned tax dollars being just squandered on luxury for politicians and the elite.
There was one time, I think it was in Washington, D.C., actually, where I was booking a hotel room, and you could choose the rate, and it was, the AAA member, CAA member rate, the regular rate, whatever. And I recall I looked at the government rate, and just because I was going through them, and it was higher than the regular rate. Now, it might have just been a fluke, but it might not have been, because, you have cities where they know that governments are going to come in that don't care about the price of things, and they'll just get mad cash from governments. And I think travel is no different there. These people are not price shopping, and why would they? And so there was the climate hypocrisy angle, and there's also just the government waste angle of this. This is one that is related. We don't trust government. We also don't trust media, but you have government and media getting into bed together. And what's the answer? What comes out of that, Isaac?
Yeah, so this comes from a new poll which was conducted by Public Square Research, and they were trying to gauge the public's trust in different types of Canadian news media, and then also the views on media that received government subsidies. So how do Canadians feel about government-funded media versus obviously media like True North that receives no government funding? And interestingly, yes, 70% of Canadians were not supportive of government subsidies for the salaries of private news organizations. So private news organizations would be like the Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, Toronto Sun, National Post, those kind of things. Oh yeah, only 4% of Canadians said they were very supportive of this, while it was 26% that were somewhat supportive, leaving, yes, 7 in 10 Canadians either not very supportive or not supportive at all.
Well, and it's just insane that no one sees this because, we trust journalists to hold government to account. So if government is the lifeline for journalists and government is the lifeline for journalism, how are you at all going to expect it to be doing what you needed to do? So, yeah, I mean, the trust issues in media are outweighing just this aspect of it, but it certainly is only going to exacerbate the problem. And William, I mean, it's just fundamental. And some journalists have criticized it because they see this, but many have just demanded more and more money from the government.
Yeah, I mean, every journalist swears up and down that the fact that some or even most of their salary that is being paid for by the government has no impact on how they choose to report on things. But the fact is that taken as a whole, if you look at the legacy media, they often obsess about the pet issues of this current government. How many stories in a typical edition of the Globe and Mail talk about climate change or talk about, some example of someone who's dealing with a gender issue, and isn't it terrible that they couldn't transition at 3.5 years old, and that's just the worst. And these are not issues that Canadians want to endlessly read about. What are Canadians concerned about? They're concerned about housing costs. They're concerned about grocery prices. They're concerned about, the fact that they can't pay their bills every month. Those are things that are really of concern. And yet legacy media doesn't pay them nearly as much attention as they should. I would say one of the reasons why True North has been so successful is we've actually looked at what ordinary Canadians from one end of the country to the other are concerned about. And we've tried to make that the central focus of our news and reporting. Mm-hmm. And as a result, I think Canadians in increasing numbers are tuning into us as they tune out from the legacy media. So if that trend continues, I think you are going to see the legacy media either becoming, solely dependent on government funding to stay in power, or we will simply see the end of Canada's legacy media as a whole.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Isaac.
Yeah, just something interesting the study brought up, which was that it said that most Canadians were completely unaware on how much funding these legacy media journalists were receiving. They estimated that there was up to 50% subsidy on those journalists' salaries of up to $85,000 a year. And then just speaking quickly on trust in legacy media, they cited a 2023 study in this research that showed that the decline in legacy media was the trust of legacy media was 55% in 2016, declining to 40% in 2023, which Trudeau was speaking on an Alberta talk show in February, where he said that, quote, conspiracy theorists and social media drivers were the ones undermining mainstream media to prevent people from essentially believing a common truth, which was why the legacy media was failing. However, the recent polling showed that only 12% of Canadians felt that they were getting the truth from mainstream news. I mean, what a low number. And then another 20% said that they believed news coverage in Canada was fair and transparent.
Yeah, and the one thing, and I've talked about this on my own show, anytime the institutions talk about trust and the trust deficit, they always point the blame at everyone else. It's when we don't trust the media, oh, it's because of disinformation, and we don't trust the government, oh, it's because of the far right. It's like, no, it's because you are morons a lot of the time.
Absolutely. Or you've covered something with such a biased slant or ignored such an incredible part of it that reasonable people watching it simply say that is a lousy job you've done. And if you're lying to us about this, what else are you lying to us about?
And I've always been, I guess, prideful in the work that True North puts out, because obviously I'm very skeptical when I read anything legacy media. Okay, what in here is actually true? Because I often find faults in their work, whether that's intentional or not. But even in other independent medias, when I'm reading their stories, I often find errors. So I like to think that we produce stories that generally contain very little errors in comparison to the rest of the industry. So yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Well, no, you're right. And one point, and I mean, I'm the managing editor of True North, so I've insisted on this, but I think a lot of our team does it anyway, is primary sources. Like, don't just report on someone else's report on a report. Find the report itself. Find the documents yourself. And I know, Isaac, you've had me tell. I mean, actually, Isaac is really good at that, because Isaac loves reading the report, and then he'll end up with like, "Oh, sorry, I am late because I have to read this 179 pages to do." And I was like, "Well, I technically asked you to, so I can't really complain." But it's so key, because oftentimes, especially with academic studies, like I used to do this all the time on my old radio show. You'd get like a news story about an academic study that would have this fantastic headline. You're like, "Wow, that's great," and then you're just like looking at the study and you're like, but it doesn't say that at all. And it's so you've got like a journalist that either is putting sensationalism first, or a journalist that doesn't understand what they're writing about. But give your primary source. And the one thing also that we're good at in True North is linking to the primary source. Like, we don't want to be information gatekeepers. We want you to have access to the same thing we did. A lot of media will reference something but not actually direct you to the original. They'll say, "Oh, in these documents we've obtained," but they don't show the documents, whereas we embed them because, we want you to check our work. That keeps us accountable.
My favorite example on this is there's a claim that is recited ad nauseum by legacy media, and it's that there are 300 far-right hate groups or white nationalist groups active in Canada. And they just state that as a fact. Now, when we've dug into that, we know that it comes from a single professor at one university who's done a quote unquote,
not even a particularly top tier university. It's like the Ontario Tech University, and it's not a slight against them, but it's not Harvard or something.
I'm not convinced that Harvard.
Well, fair enough.
It once was, but it comes from this one person, and this person, despite multiple requests, has never released their work. They have never released the list. They have never released the methodology on how this list was put together. When we pushed on it, the university turned down our ATIPs, turned down our requests, and yet, if you read any news story that the legacy media publishes about, quote unquote hate groups, you will see that 300 hate group number quoted as if it is a stone cold fact. And the truth is, it's not. As near as we can tell, it's something that one professor may or may not have just made up one day, because she absolutely refuses to publish anything about it that supports it, far from even putting out a list of them.
Oh, yeah. For all we know, it's, she was going by Facebook groups or something. And, there's a Facebook group that posted something she didn't like. So, let's put it up on the list of 300 anyway. So Barbara Perry, it's not too late to show your work. We'll take it. We'll publish it in full. You should be happy as a researcher, drawing more attention to your work, unless that is you don't stand behind it. But anyway, that does it for us for today. My thanks to Isaac Lamoureux and William McBeath for coming on the show as always, and all of you for tuning in. We'll talk to you next week, but have a great weekend, everyone. And Cosman's been fighting over that Barbara Perry list for like 2 years now or something, isn't it?
I think it's a personal sort of campaign for him now.
It's like before the Ontario Privacy Commissioner now.
When Cosman ATIP'd it, the university came back and basically said, "Oh, it's research in progress, therefore we can't release it." Except it's been research in progress for years and years.
And she's still releasing the claim, which suggests that part's not in progress.
Absolutely. She's still making this claim, without a shred of evidence. And as a result, I think if you read any of those legacy media stories, they provide none of that context. None of them are saying, "Oh, and by the way, this is just this one person's thing from a report she won't produce, from a list she didn't cite how she compiled. Oh, and we can't see the list." It's just infuriating for those of us who actually like to click on those links and read source documents to try and figure out what the real story is.